In today's episode of Today in World War II, March 7th, the Soviets begin to break through the final defense line in Viipuri in the Karelian Peninsula in Finland. U-boat ace Gunther Prien was killed when his U-boat was taken out by the RAF or the Royal Navy, we're not sure. And the U.S. unexpectedly gets a gift when they capture an intact bridge over the Rhine. Let's get started. Okay, today on March 7th, 1940, as we've been chronicling in this series, the end game was about over for the Finns on the Karelian Isthmus in the Winter War against the Soviets. The Soviets for the last week had been pressing ever closer to capturing the Finnish provincial city Viipuri. Russians call it Vyborg. On today's date, they finally start to break through. And meanwhile, as I said yesterday, the Prime Minister Rutte and his diplomatic party had arrived in Moscow, and today they would be starting to negotiate the final peace initiative. So it became basically just became a race of what was going to happen first. Would the Finnish defense collapse first, or would they be able to sign a more or less not win-win, but at least acceptable for the Finns to swallow to be able to keep their main thing was to keep the majority of their land and the majority of their freedom from the Soviets. So that was the race, and we'll chronicle in the next few days how that goes. On March 7, 1941, U-boat ace Gunther Prien was killed on this date when his U-boat, the famous U-47, they're not really sure how his boat was sunk. It's assumed that it was a British destroyer Wolverine, could have been a mine, but for whatever reason on that patrol, his boat went down. And like with most submarines, you never truly know what happened because they just go silent and they never return from a patrol, assumed loss. That's the way it was. Now, for those if you don't remember, and we covered this earlier in our series, but Gunther Prien was one of the very first U-boat stars during the Happy Time. He ingeniously slipped his U-boat into Scapa Flow, which was the main British Royal Navy base north of Scotland, and it was supposedly impregnable by submarine, but he got through and he was able to sink a Royal Navy battleship. Now it was a World War I battleship, so it wasn't like he sank the Duke of York, a more modern battleship. It didn't matter. It was a great propaganda triumph. It was a military triumph as well, I suppose. But the fact that he got in and got out, sank the battleship and got out was just an amazing thing. So of course, he became a star for Goebbels and their propaganda machine. But much like the German fighter pilots and aces and the Japanese as well, they weren't able to rotate out. They fought until they died, and that's the way it was with the U-boat aces. So the ones that were racking up incredible scores and tallies of tonnage and ships sunk during this part of the war, 39, 40, and even into 41. 41 was when they started to go down. And then, of course, we know in the Battle of the Atlantic, by May of 43, it was pretty much over, but the shouting, because the Allies had too many ships, too many technological advances, and they overwhelmed the U-boats. But we still got another couple of years before that happens. But in this case, Gunther Prien, gone. And finally, on March 7th, 1945, I have been chronicling yesterday, for example, the Third Army reached the Rhine River, the Ninth Army reached Cologne or Köln, and unexpectedly, no, before I get to this, the Germans have been dropping bridges to keep them from being used to have the Allies breach the last defense, natural defense against them. In this case, it was the Rhine River. Well, unexpectedly, for the Ninth Armored Division in the southern Germany, they tried to blow the bridge up, but it did not blow up completely. It was a railway bridge, and so they were able to get over. It was called the very famous bridge at Remagen, and the only negative, if you want to call a free gift negative, is that it was not in the most convenient place to exploit that. But at least they got a lot of troops over, a lot of tanks over. The engineers did the best they could, but it was the target now for the Luftwaffe and artillery, and they funneled as many troops as they could over. but eventually it did collapse, but it collapsed late enough in the game to where a significant amount of U.S. troops were able to get over into the east side of the Rhine River. Now, by the time they were able to fight their way through very not mountainous but hilly terrain and terrain that was not conducive to rapid armored advances. The other divisions, other armies had caught up, Patton crossed, Montgomery crossed the Rhine in their sectors, but nevertheless it was a shock, and it was a very important gift that the Germans gave the Ninth Army, or the Ninth Armored Division, I should say. Well, thank you very much for watching this video. As always, I appreciate it, and I will talk to you tomorrow.